Today we're sewing Simplicity 8637 View B.
We're going to stay stitch from the bottom to the upper portion of the front bodice. So from the bottom to the shoulder. About a 1/2 inch. And then from the back, we're doing from the shoulder to the center, the shoulder to the center. Now we're going to sew the darts in the front bodice piece. So piece 1, and I'm going to pinch there and find the center there. And I'm going to pin, making sure that I line up my markings. So we have to check on the other side. There we go. Almost perfect. Yep. Pinch, and I just kind of press it. Pin on the line. There we go. So you see, it matches up perfectly. That's how I do my darts. I pinch at the end stop and the center. I find the center of this portion and fold. Then I pull here, and it almost always lines up perfectly. You're going to do this for both darts, the side of the bodice and the front lower. Okay, so then we're going to find this dart over here on the side and do the same for that dart. Okay, so then we're going to find this dart over here on the side and do the same for that dart. Now we're going to sew in our dart, and I'm starting with the lower front, the very front dart. I'm going to sew on this. And you want to make sure that you're not moving it. This fabric is very slinky and slippery. It's a silky, so just try to keep it as smooth as possible, as stationary as possible. And I'm holding this final little piece here. And now I'm holding it kind of taut here just to keep it smooth without, you know, making it move around. And you're gonna slow down and you're gonna come to the edge. You're kind of grading it out to the very point of where the needle is, the pin. Okay, you're going to leave those ends long. You do not want to back stitch there. You just want to sew right off the end. And then I'm just going to tie maybe like 3 knots, 3 ties here. Some people keep both the threads together and knot it. I just like doing it like this better. Okay, trim there. We are going to press this side dart down and press this front dart to the center. We have right tie end and the left tie end, and we're going to fold. So you should have your markings here on the ends. So make sure that you see your markings. You're gonna leave the marking side open, but you're gonna fold your belts or your ties facing each other and pin all along here. And when you come to the end, you're going to pin down this as well. You're only leaving open where you have the mark. So you should have your tie ends pinned. And remember, you are going to be sewing one end and leaving one open. So I'm starting with the side that is to be left open. I'm sewing in a 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. When you come to the corner, you're going to, excuse me, press your foot up with your needle still in the fabric, and you're going to pivot at that corner. and then just keep sewing and back stitch at the end. I'm going to trim the seam allowances of the ties just slightly. You don't want to take it all the way to the stitching. I'm going to turn my ties right side out. You don't want to push too hard with this because you will make a hole in your fabric. So you just want to push enough to get it going. Okay. This is the long tie end. And then you just want to use the point of your turning tool just to kind of, you know, get those edges nice and pointed and everything turned. We're going to press. You're going to do this to both ties, and then we're going to press. Remember, when you're pressing, you want this seam to be on the bottom and everything to be nicely pressed like that. Now you're going to pin your ties to the correct side of your bodice front. So looking at the instructions in the picture, I know that the long tie is going to be the left side. And if you put this up against your body, this would be your left front. So you're gonna take your left tie or the longest tie, and you're gonna make sure that you place it in between those markings. It has to be in between there. Your markings on your tie, the dots must line up with the dots here, or it will be too high and the seam will come into contact with it, or it'll be too low. So make sure you put this at the correct location, and also make sure that your seam, this seam is down. So you're gonna have seam side facing down and this folded side facing at the top. It does not say that on the instructions, but you'll know that you've placed it correctly when you've done that, okay? So make sure you place both sides, both bodices, front, left, and right, and you have your ties pinned on. Now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna baste the ties across the ends. So you're just gonna take this tie in the front, and you're just going to put a stitch across the end to hold the tie in place. And you do this to both sides. We have attached our front to our back at the shoulders. Now we're going to stitch in a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Across both shoulders. Make sure that you press your seams open on the sleeves that you just sewn, and then now we're gonna get piece 10, your armhole flounce. First thing you're gonna wanna do is take this lower edge and we're gonna roll under 1/4 inch and we're gonna press it. You could mark 1/4 inch on your machine, but for me, it's much easier just to press under 1/4 inch along this entire lower edge on both sleeves. After you have your 1/4 inch pressed, you're going to stitch on the edge of that 1/4 inch all the way around the sleeve. After stitching the 1/4 inch along the edge, you are going to just trim down very carefully all the way around. This excess from this rolled over edge, about 1/8 inch, so very narrow. and then you want to stitch that down as straight as possible. You want to take your time because this is a very narrow edge and you don't want to go quickly and have your stitching be zigzaggy and look a mess. So another option is that you can use your rolled hem foot. So I'm just gonna start, I hand rolled it for a couple stitches. And then we're gonna pick the foot up and we're going to tuck in. This is very slinky fabric, so. Okay. And you just kind of want to guide it. Okay, so that's what, excuse me, your rolled hem, using your rolled hem foot. It's much cleaner and nicer versus doing it the way the instructions tell you. It's not gonna look as clean and nice on the bottom. It still looks good on the top, but don't have your rolled hem foot, you can do it that way. This is how our hem looks on the outside. Okay, so they both look really nice. This one is the rolled by hand, so tucked under and stitched and cut and then tucked under again and stitched. This one is the rolled. So you see it's much neater and cleaner. All right, so now we're gonna do 5/8 inch. I'm gonna make a long stitch and we are going to stitch in our top portion of our sleeve. So set your machine to a long stitch. Okay, so now we are going to take this and we're going to press under a 1/4 inch on the raw edge, and then we're going to fold that over and we're going to press again at the marking where the line is, where the stitching is, okay? You're gonna pin that in place. We are making the casing for the elastic for the upper portion of the sleeve. Okay, so we have our casing pinned. So now all we're gonna do is stitch right along the edge here on both, and then we're gonna get our elastic guide 11. Okay, so we're going to remove our basting threads now. Just pull each of those out. And then we're going to press this casing. We're gonna press it, okay? So make sure that you press along this edge and pull all the stitches out. So take piece 11 and take your 1/4 inch elastic, and we're going to cut 2 pieces of elastic for each sleeve. Now you're going to get your elastic tool and insert it into your prepared casing on the upper edge of your sleeve. And you'll do this to both sleeve pieces. Be careful not to pull the entire piece of the tail of the elastic through. You're going to stitch across the end just to secure it in place. And then make sure it's straight and smooth. Pull it out of the other side. Make sure again that it's straight and smooth the way it needs to be. So it's laying the same way all the way across. Okay, and then you're going to sew down the other side. You'll do this to both sleeves. Now you're going to take your front and back that you've already prepared at the shoulder, and you're going to pin right sides together, the front flounce to that upper edge, matching the notches on the sleeve opening. Okay. And you're going to do the same thing. So you've got the front and the back. And then we're going to go to the back now. And this is the sleeve opening. I'm going to match up my notches. And I'm going to pin everything down. And then we're going to baste these pieces in place. So that it looks like this. Here's the back neck opening, and then here is your shoulder opening or your sleeve arm seat, and you will just attach it here so that the ruffle lays on top of the sleeve like this. Okay, I'm sorry, the shoulder. Now we're gonna baste those in place. So I'm going to use a long stitch, and I'm just going to kind of baste these in place. Okay, so this is how the flounce should look. This is your front and this is your back. And as you see, when you roll the flounce down for your sleeve, it looks like this. Okay, and your shoulders here. Side seams are here. All right, so now we're going to prepare the lining. We have gone ahead and applied our interfacing to the lining piece. So we have our interfacing on this front opening here. And then we have the interfacing on the inside of the back neck edge here. So we're gonna go ahead and sew in the darts for the back and the front the same exact way that we just did for the actual bodice of the dress. So make your darts. Make sure that you change your upper and lower threads if you are using a contrasting colored fabric for your lining before you start sewing. And sew your darts in both front and back pieces, following the directions for the bodice front and back. Okay, so we have gone ahead and prepared our darts of our front and our back, and we've attached at the shoulder seams and pressed all of our darts and seams exactly the same way as the front piece. So now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna do a basting stitch, a really long stitch, just so we can mark up the depth of the bottom of our lining. So we need to sew a 5/8 inch seam here. It's a basting stitch really, just for the depth that we need to be able to roll under or fold under this allowance here for this lining, okay? So 5/8 inch is the seam allowance. We need to set that in place. We're gonna do a long machine stitch. Okay, so all the way across. And just smooth it out. You don't want any gathers in it. Okay, we're gonna do the back and the other front piece as well. And do the other front piece, and then we're going to smooth these out and then press them towards the inside or the wrong side of the lining. Okay, so I've pressed those seam allowances on the bottom portion of the lining towards the inside. So it looks like this. This is the back piece. You're gonna go ahead, I'm gonna remove those stitches. We don't need them there anymore. You just pull them out so that you have your folded over and pressed piece there on the bottoms of each lining piece. Then we're going to take our bodice, our true bodice front and back of the dress. You're gonna need to switch out your thread. If you have, like I do, a different colored thread, you wanna put back the original thread now and get your bodice piece. We have our bodice piece here, and we have our flounce or that sleeve ruffle. So I'm going to take this and I'm gonna need to roll it up so that it doesn't get sewn when we attach our lining to this. So I'm gonna roll this up and I'm gonna pin it just roll it up. It doesn't have to look cute. You just want to make sure that you get it out of the way of this portion and this portion. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to pin it here just to kind of keep it secure and out of the way. And I'm going to take this piece. I'm going to pin that. And I'm going to take this piece here and make sure that stays out of the way and pin that. And you need to do that to both flounce pieces. You want to take your bodice front and back and find a big space, a big flat surface, okay? You're going to lay this out on your flat surface and you're gonna take your lining and right sides facing together. You want to put your lining on top, line everything up with your notches, all of that. Okay, line everything up, and you want to pin all the way around where your arm seat is and your neck, the front opening where your neckline is. Okay, so we're gonna pin this, but go to a nice big flat surface so everything can be lined up perfectly. You're gonna pin at your notches here, making sure to keep that flounce out of the way. Now we're going to attach the lining. We have right sides facing together. Make sure that the sleeve that you made is rolled up and pinned in the center here, and that the belt is out of the way. So I've kind of pinned it here so it doesn't fall down into my stitching. And the sleeve is just rolled up. Show you. The sleeve is just rolled up in the center here. It's just kind of rolled up, and then I've pinned it so that it stays out of the way. And then I've pinned down my lining. Okay, so we're gonna sew in a 5/8 inch seam the armhole openings and the neckline. do the neckline. So I'm gonna make sure that my tie is laying down. Make sure everything is lined up with your markings so that your facing fold stops at the marking. You want to sew this all the way around the entire neckline. I'm going to use my pinking shears to trim my seams. Make sure you're checking the front and back and that you don't have any of the dress in the way. Definitely don't want to accidentally cut your dress. You want to do this to all of the seams you just sewed. Now for the neckline, I'm going to just kind of cut where my corners are, and then use the pinking shears again just to trim the neckline area. We're going to turn our bodice right side out. Be careful because you have pins in there, and you want to check and make sure everything is sewn correctly and laying nicely. So I'm going to take my pins out. That's my sleeve. Okay, I'm going to press my dress now. I'm going to take the pins out of the tie ends. Okay, so I'm going to take my dress to the ironing board and press everything out nicely before we understitch the dress. Okay, so the dress bodice has been pressed along the seams. So now we're gonna understitch as much as possible. So I'm gonna go to the inside of my dress, and I'm going to find those areas where we just sewed, our facing front and our sleeve. So I'm gonna start with our facing front. Start here. Okay, and you're going to understitch as far as possible. So that means I'm going to take, and I'm using white thread on the top of this so that it will look as professional as possible. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to use my finger to hold my facing, my seam allowances toward my facing, and you're just going to start here, making sure that your seam allowance underneath is pressed towards your facing, and you're just gonna stitch. And you're gonna stitch as far as you can. When you can't stitch anymore, then you'll just come up and you'll start again in another area of the bodice. Making sure that that seam allowance is pressed towards the lining as you sew. And I'm coming close to the shoulder, and pretty soon I'm not going to be able to go any further. I think I'm about there. We'll trim our threads, and then I'm gonna pick back up. So I've done this portion, so now I'm gonna pick back up probably in here and do the neck, and then pick back up again at the front and then do down the rest of the front. Now we're doing the sleeve opening, or the arm-C. Let's see, make sure everything is smooth before we start. All right, so now we're going to sew our side seams of our bodice. So you're gonna take your back, open it out, and I'm gonna just kind of tuck my sleeve out of the way. I'm gonna take my front, I'm gonna open it out, and I'm gonna find the seam where the two fabrics, the lining and the fabric, meet. And I'm going to line up the white lining edge and the fabric, and I'm gonna pin there. Then I'm gonna find my side seam notches, and I'm gonna pin there. Okay, and then I'm gonna find my edges and pin. And then find my notches on the front of the fabric and pin there. And then find my edges here, pin. Then I'm gonna make sure that I pin the remainder of the dress fabrics together down the side. You should have 2 dots here. That's where the opening will be for your wrap. You're gonna do the same thing to the front, just kind of easing everything in and pinning. For the other side, we will pin all the way down with no openings. We're only leaving openings for the right side. And then we will meet at the machine. We have 5/8 inch seam allowance here, and I've changed my threads, excuse me, to the upper and the lower thread are now the color of the fabric. You will sew to the dot and then back stitch there. And then you're gonna take your needle out and you're gonna begin sewing again at the dot. Back stitch and then continue sewing. Okay, we're going to back stitch at that dot again. And then we're going to sew from the dot to the end. And it's very, very small amount of space right here, okay? Basically just like enough to do a back stitch and 1 or 2 stitches. Okay, I went ahead and pressed the seam that we just sewed, the side seam. I pressed it open. Now you're just gonna fold this down so that I'm gonna press it again just on the edge here, but you should have an opening here that leads to an opening here, okay? This is where your wrap tie will go. Okay, so now you're gonna pin and sew without any openings the opposite side seam. So now we're gonna stay stitch the skirt of the dress, and I'm gonna start with piece 9. This is my skirt back. So we're gonna find our side seam and we're gonna sew about a 1/2 inch stay stitch, and we're gonna go from the side towards the center back. So now we have pinned the center seam of the back piece, and now we're going to sew that in a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Once we finish this, we're going to serge the edges, the raw edges. If you don't have a serger, then you can use your pinking shears, or you can do a cover stitch on your sewing machine, or you can just zigzag the edges, the raw edges. And then I'm going to press the seams open. This is what your seam should look like when you're finished. Okay? Now we have pinned our front pieces to our side of our back. So each side is pinned along. So each side is pinned. So now we're going to stitch in a 5/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to stitch both sides, and then we're going to serge the raw edges and press the seam open. Now we have attached the front pieces to the back and serged and pressed open. Now we are going to do a narrow rolled hem. So I've already pressed over this edge about 1/8. Okay, I have my rolled hem foot attachment on, and I've started by stitching the first few stitches of the seam by hand, like I showed you. And now I'm just going to continue to stitch while rolling in this seam. And sometimes you'll have to put your stitch over, move your needle over a bit to catch it, and I think that's what I'll need to do, so I just did that. You have to adjust your needle as you see, as you find. I just want to show you how slow I do this when I'm using this slinky kind of fabric. I literally like guide the whole thing the whole way and really just take my time, so it's really clean and looks really nice. If you mess up and part of the seam is out of the roll, you can always take a few stitches out and kind of back stitch and start over at that point, but it's a pain, so you really don't want to do that. To attach the bodice to the skirt, we've pressed our hem so everything is nice and smooth there. So now we're going to take this, find the back right side, so I have this turned upside down, and I'm going to start with the back. So find my center back in my notches, and I'm going to attach. Okay, now I'm going to find my side seams. Line up those seams. And then find my front edge and notch. Or notches. And my front edge. I'll line this up right where the dot is. And then also for my dart, it's pressed to the center, so I want to pin that down too and make sure that stays in that direction when I sew. You're going to do the same thing to the other side, and then you're going to come back in and you're just going to ease the rest of the fabric into place and pin. Okay, we're coming to the end. I'm just going to make sure those pieces are lined up well on the end. Trim this seam slightly just to kind of neaten it up. Not trimming too much. Okay, so I have pinned down my bodice lining over my skirt. So we've pressed our seams up. I've trimmed them a little, pressed them up, and then now I've pinned. So now we're gonna hand stitch, and you wanna be careful not to go through to the other side. So I usually catch the threads here when I'm sewing. So you wanna just slip stitch this whole edge all the way around by hand.